Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, the glue in their relationship. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. If you have not already listened to my analyses of Amber Heard and Johnny Depp, you may wish to stop now, as there are spoilers ahead. If you have, then press on. I have analysed Amber Heard to be a narcissist by consideration of a considerable volume of material. Similarly, with an even larger volume of material for the much more famous Johnny Depp, and therefore there's far more to analyse in relation to him. I have analysed him as narcissistic, but not a narcissist. For those of you who are perhaps hard of understanding or hearing, there is a difference. It's evident in the comments that some of you don't listen properly or don't understand. Please recognise, and it's important to do so, there is a difference between being narcissistic and a narcissist. With that stated, many of you have wondered, what is it that's brought these two together and what made them stick together for a period of time? As you know, I classify individuals for the purpose of understanding narcissism into four main groups: narcissist, empath, normal, and narcissistic, but not narcissist. You may want to watch my video, The Glues of Relationships, where I explain the interaction between all of those four groups. You'll find it fascinating, and it's very important viewing. I also have specifically explained what the glue is between Depp and Heard. Many people, understandably, have asked, why would a narcissist be drawn to a narcissistic person? Why would a narcissistic person be drawn to a narcissist? What would keep them together? What would drive them apart? These are very valid questions. I addressed those questions in an interview that I undertook with Doug, a great guy who runs a channel, Dazed But Not Confused. Doug was a member of a cult, and he escaped, and he had narcissists all around him, and he finds where he lives at present, in his particular part of California, to remain a viper's nest of narcissists, and he has a very keen interest in this. Doug and I have spoken a number of times, and in the most recent interview, which if you haven't already accessed it, I explain in detail the nature of the dynamic between Depp and Heard, explaining what the glue in their relationship is. In order to save me time and to enable those of you who are interested in Depp and Heard, who might not have picked up on it because you solely focus on my videos about Depp and Heard and don't watch the other ones, I am now going to provide you with the interview that follows thereafter, and you will shortly come to the section where I talk about Depp and Heard in detail and the glue in their relationship so that you can gain this further understanding. You can then dip out of the interview, of course, if you wish, or you may wish to listen to more to avail yourself of a greater understanding about narcissism generally. We touch on a variety of matters that shows the interaction, and also I address the impact of addiction and how it manifests and how we draw the distinction between seeing how this affects an empathic person, a narcissist, and a narcissistic individual. So a lot of the interview will give you further understanding about the dynamic between Depp and Heard, and also certain aspects of what you've been hearing about Johnny Depp and his own behaviours to help you understand more. So I'd encourage you to listen to it in its entirety to improve and increase your understanding. Here comes the interview and that material.
Friends, welcome back. This is interview number 6 with H.G. Tudor, and since we have a lot of ground to cover, we're not going to waste any time. First off, my friend, how are you doing? I guess it's afternoon your time?
It is. It's late afternoon where I am currently in the world, so all is tickety-boo at this end. Doug, thank you very much. How are you faring?
Good, man, and thank you for coming on yet another time. I really do appreciate our conversations, and you know what? I originally had a different kind of interview plan for today.
Okay.
But I have my mind kind of blowing over the last few days with this series that you did on Johnny Depp. Now, I know you covered Amber Heard, and I know you've been covering the trial in general,
Hmm.
but my man, that 24-part series that you put out really wrecked my brain because I thought I knew what the trial was about, but
Mm.
going on that thing was an adventure, and I'm sure I'm not alone. So I wanted to, we might get into some of the other questions and stuff that I had planned, but I would be remiss if I missed this because it's a masterclass in narcissism. So would you mind if I started off with a couple of questions on
Not
that
at all.
specifically?
Fill your boots.
Okay. Well, first off, how much work did you put into that thing? And if you don't mind briefly describing the process from beginning to completion of ascertaining who Johnny Depp actually is.
Okay. Many hours went into it in terms of locating source material from where he's been interviewed, short interviews, lengthy interviews, for instance, the Rolling Stone interview, watching video interviews with him, appearances, uh, news footage about him, broadcast reports, and so on and so forth. And so there was a real smorgasbord of information, obviously, with somebody like Johnny Depp, who's world famous and has been on that world famous stage for decades. There really one could have a set of Encyclopedia Britannica about that man. So huge amount of material to go through. And basically what I looked for was a range from, if you will, your more sort of pop culture, then more serious pieces about him, more serious news articles about him, then your more sort of disposable interviews. And then I took material that was both pro and against. So those that were clearly a fan of Depp and the way that it was put forward, and then those that were questioning his behaviours. So you got both sides of the argument there. Now, I think he's a great actor, and I've enjoyed many of his films, but that's completely by the by for me. And the advantage that I have is that I can come into this completely dispassionately, because as I regularly explain to our listeners, Doug, that it's always about going to the evidence.
Right.
Yeah. So this is a case that has stirred up considerable passion on either side. There are those that can't stand Amber Heard, which therefore has coloured their view of her, and thus, by comparison, Depp. There are those that think that he walks on water because they're such huge fans, and there's a lot of sort of the parasocial relationship has become evident, where they look at him as almost as a friend, even though they don't know him. Right. They've had this involvement with him, and so that colours their views. And then, of course, there are those that have a very entrenched view that think he's a nasty piece of work, that he's an uncaring drug addict who basically is abusive and is trying to worm his way out of it, utilising his charisma and his currency with the general public. So strong views on either side. So huge amount of material to get through, and to portray it in an accurate way. But also, the main thrust of it was to get people realising this. When you look at something in isolation, you can find that that person could well be an empath. But you could also find that that could be the behavior of a narcissist, to get people to understand that my kind, we walk amongst you. How? By fitting in. So I see comments, for instance, where somebody once said, well, Depp gave away $150 million to Vanessa Paradis. Narcissist would never do that. Wrong. Mm-hmm. A narcissist might well do that if that suited the prime aims. And remember, if he's got 300 million and he gives half of it away, he's not exactly on the bones of his arse, as I made the point. He's not left down to his last couple of million. He's not going to be eating out of dumpsters. He's still got $150 million, and he'll earn quite a lot more on top of that. So if he were a narcissist, he could engage in such financial largesse to say to the world, look at me. I'm Captain Generous here. I'm a good father. I'm a good ex-husband. I don't bear her any ill will, and I've given away half the fortune. He's still got half his fortune. And of course, one can interpret it another way to say, well, what a generous empathic act. And so you can never, ever analyze. Even going up and physically assaulting somebody doesn't tell you in that instance everything you need to know about that person, because there are so many external factors that could be impacting upon that. So what I wanted people to do was to go to this exercise of looking at the evidence, which is what I always tell people to do when they're dealing with their own ensnarements. Go to the evidence, to get people to think about the evidence and also to understand it doesn't turn on one thing. You have to look at it in the round. So it was a comprehensive review of the material, Doug. And, of course, he's a complicated character. And that made him ideal in terms of being able to show the different facets of behaviors and how you could go one way or the other. And I purposely, when I was preparing it, was always saying it might mean this or it might mean that. And then even when I did the live stream as the denouement and the conclusion to it all, to purposely do it in a way to keep people guessing, because obviously that entertains, and entertaining education is what I'm all about. And it ensures that it's drilled into people's minds as well. So huge body of work, took me a very long time, and people were most generous with regard to showing their super thanks in the live stream, which was jolly good of them. And it enabled me as well to stick two fingers up to those people who are all saying, oh, well, he's going to stick the answer behind a paywall anyway. That's what he always does. Well, you miserable bastards listening to this, I didn't do that.
HG, that freaking thing was a roller coaster ride. I want to say to the audience that's listening, if you haven't checked it out, many people will, but I'm going to leave a link on my channel in the description box to part 1, and then you can work your way through the 23 parts. I promise you, it'll keep you guessing. I didn't feel like you were leading anybody on, HG. I just love the way you laid out the evidence and you get people to think for themselves. You weren't giving people the answers. You're just simply laying out the evidence. That's the biggest thing I got out of this thing. And I listened to it several times, by the way, different parts. I mean, I'm still trying to wrap my brain around it. So I wanted to say to the audience, there's going to be some spoilers, I'm sure, in this interview. So I highly recommend going and checking it out first, and then watch the conclusion in part 24, which is a 35-minute live stream. It's your most intense series. And as you said, you're dealing with a really complex person. Anyone with a monicum or a monicum of knowledge about narcissism from the school of Tudor will know Amber Heard is a narcissist. But what made Johnny Depp so interesting, do you mind if I say the spoiler about what you've determined him to be?
No, go ahead. You've warned people there's a spoiler there, so that's fine.
Okay. You know, this, by the way, I want to also say kudos for standing by your logic and your knowledge, because that was kind of risky. You risked justice for Johnny coming after you, but there's, you know, you laid out the fucking evidence. I agree with what you wrote, but I wouldn't have guessed it.
Well, that's very good of you to recognize that. And
well, you laid it out really well, HG.
You make a valid point there, Doug, because there are those of my kind that will adopt a populist agenda in what they do, that the narcissist, particularly those that can sort of read a situation, we're chameleons. So
exactly
what a narcissist will often do is be all things to all men and women. So they will try and identify what's the prevailing wind here, and I'll back that horse. I'll give the people what they want. And then on another occasion, so Boris Johnson, the British Prime Minister, is an excellent example of that he operates through populism, that he gives people what he thinks they want, and he's pretty good at gauging that. And it enables him to ride roughshod over so many other things. And only yesterday, of course, he was condemned again in the report about Partygate. And so far, he continues to cling on. But I won't digress too much into that. But narcissists will do things which are the popular thing. However, the other aspect of this is that the quality of my material and the legacy that I'm creating outweighs my need to be liked.
Excellent.
It outweighs my need for perhaps a particular group to start coming and hating me. If Justice for Johnny want to do that, and I haven't actually seen any signs of that, if they were to do so, it wouldn't trouble me, because at the end of the day, I have looked at the evidence and I'm right by what I've done in a comprehensive and forensic way. This has not been done on a whim, and I should imagine that none of them will have necessarily listened to everything in a comprehensive way and would come back with anything amounting to a well thought out rebuttal. It'll come from a place of emotion. That's the difficulty for many people, is that when they deal with these things, they come at it from a place of emotion. So even if they did start to hate on me, well, it's all good fuel anyway, isn't it? So what do I care about that? The point is, and people in the comments did, there were a handful of people who said, oh, I thought that you'd pander to the prevailing view of, oh, we love him, he's an empath, so you'll make him an empath. No, I can understand why people would think that, but no, I am guided by the evidence and making that proper and accurate assessment, and also that impartiality and dispassionate approach to it is central to the establishment of my legacy. Because if people start thinking that I'm just going to go with what's popular in terms of a determination, then my credibility is affected. And credibility equals legacy, which amounts to a residual benefit for me and the assertion of control. I am able to assert control by people recognizing that my work is valuable and credible. If I start to diminish that, that will erode my need for control, which, as you know, Doug, is part of the prime aims.
That makes complete sense, HG. And also, that's kind of one of the advantages I was thinking that a narcissist, or and particularly a psychopath, someone who doesn't feel fear, has over someone like, say, me. I would have been a little bit hesitant and worried putting out my, let's say I came up with that, right? But I know you didn't give a fuck, and you're just, you knew you were right. Here's the evidence. I mean, it is hard to dispute. And I imagine you felt absolutely no worries or fears about putting that out there, right?
Absolutely. As you know, I don't experience anxiety or worry or fear or those things. There's also the point that I find it quite laughable when people do rail against me in these matters, beating their tiny fists against the edifice of the ultra, because what they do is they come along and they do it basically, no, you're wrong, HG, and that's it. Oh, right, I'm wrong because you tell me I'm wrong. That's well argued. Well done. Now, if someone was to write a detailed email to me, picking apart what I've said, and they do so in a credible way, well, good for them. Okay, I will still disagree with them because I've done my evaluation, but at least they've done it in a constructive way. And therefore, they're holding true to an argument based upon the evidence as they see it. But for a lot of the individuals, and it's not just in relation to this series, you see it with other things. When I'm talking about narcissism generally, somebody will come along and basically throw a pelter at me, which they're entitled to do, but they back it up with the square root of fuck all. So you have no credibility when you come and do that. Right. I will just either take the mick out of you and point out that what you've done has no substance behind it, and I'll show the evidence that contradicts you, or I'll just ignore you because you're simply not worth my time or effort. But if somebody comes and wants to engage me in a reasoned discussion about it, then I'm interested from an intellectual point of view what they've got to say about it. So that's quite all right.
And like you said, come at you with some evidence and have a platform to speak with. I mean, that's one of the things that, again, I guess you don't feel frustration, but you put that's such an unbelievably exhaustive study that you put in. And that's just one of the series. And then you pumped out 5 videos the following day.
Well, yes, interestingly, I had a consultation yesterday, Doug, with a Swedish client of mine. And she said, oh, I thought you might sound tired and you might want to move the consultation because
that's what I thought interviewing you today.
Yeah, I did the live stream and I said, well, no, I am an absolute machine when it comes to the prodigious amount of material that I produce.
You are. Again, another advantage you have over an empathic person, you bastard. It's not fair. You don't experience fear. I guess there's a trade-off, HG, for that, so I wouldn't trade that. But damn it, I mean, you are a machine, and the amount of work you get done is unparalleled. So without further ado, we've kept the audience, if they haven't watched it, suspended enough. You've actually determined that Johnny Depp, well, like I said, we know Amber Heard's a narcissist. Anybody could figure that out. But you've determined, much to the chagrin of the Justice for Johnny people, that he's not an empath. He's not a normal. He's not a narcissist. He's narcissistic.
That's right.
And that's why I wanted to bring this up, because it gives us an opportunity to, because HG, we're kind of locked into, okay, I'm a normal, he's an empath, or, she's a narcissist. We don't get too much of an opportunity to dive into narcissistic. That was one of the, and plus it's on the world stage, and, it's the trial of the century or the bread and circuses of the century, right? But who cares? From the study of narcissism, it's amazing to have this opportunity. So could you briefly explain, how could someone like Johnny Depp, a narcissistic person, become ensnared by a narcissist? How does that dynamic work? Kind of what are they getting off of each other? And then also, well, I guess just we could riff off that.
Okay. Well, What I will do, I will answer it, but I'll also direct people to a video which might have just come out before this airs, which is called The Glue of Relationships, Normal, Empath, Narcissistic, and Narcissists, where I give a brief explanation as to what those 4 categories are, and then I explain what the dynamic is between them all in terms of which ones are easy to ensnare, why they stay ensnared, what a normal or narcissistic relationship looks like, and so on and so forth, giving all of the various combinations. So that goes into expansive detail. So I direct listeners, if they haven't already listened to it, to go and listen to it. Now, to address your question, where we have a narcissistic individual and a narcissist, what's going on? Well, let's start with it from the point of view of the narcissist. Why might the narcissist draw in a narcissistic individual rather than, say, an empath? Well, first of all, a narcissistic individual does have emotional empathy, albeit limited. A narcissistic individual may well often present with traits which are hugely attractive to a narcissist, because that narcissistic individual engages in exhibitions of pride, vanity, and showmanship, for example. So what happens is they perhaps engage in financial largesse. That's a residual benefit that the narcissist becomes interested in. A narcissistic individual will provide fuel. They can provide just as much fuel as an empathic individual does.
Really?
Yeah, because if I'm being shouted at by an empath, who's my intimate partner primary source, and I was being shouted at by a narcissistic intimate partner primary source, their fuel is just as potent and the amounts they're giving me is just the same, because it's the fuel that's coming from those types of individual. Now, so they present in a way. Also remember that narcissistic individual sort of engaging in the showcasing, the showmanship, and they have emotional empathy, will present as quite an interesting but likable individual. And therefore the narcissism will be thinking, okay, can get plenty of fuel from this person. The narcissistic individuals wanting to impress the narcissist, which makes them easy at that juncture to control, because they're buying into the relationship too, because what they see from the narcissist appeals to them. And I'll address that further in a moment when I discuss it from the narcissistic point of view. So the way that the narcissistic person presents, plenty of fuel available, they present as eminently controllable at that stage, because of the way that they're regarding the narcissist. They will be exhibiting some rather attractive character traits as well, because they may well be well connected as a consequence of being narcissistic. They may well have a huge house because they're very narcissistic, and their selfishness has ensured that they've looked after number one, and there are the residual benefits that come with it. And so from the narcissist point of view, those prime aims are looking really good at that stage. Okay, now the problem for the narcissist, of course, comes that as the narcissist moves into devaluation with that individual, which will inevitably happen as a consequence of them being the intimate partner primary source, the narcissist then starts to dole out the devaluing behaviors. And this is where the difficulty arises, because the narcissistic individual is more likely to fight back because their own emotional empathy has eroded and they don't have a lot of it. So that erodes very quickly, exposing anger, jealousy, envy, resentment, defiance, argumentativeness, selfishness. And all of those things then become a problem for the narcissist because they threaten the narcissist's sense of control. And that's when you get a very turbulent relationship. Now, what does the narcissist do in response to those threats to control? They tighten their grip, don't they? Initially, at least. So they try all the harder to bring that narcissistic individual under control. So let's put that in the context of Depp and Heard. Heard comes pootling along, and there's Depp, world famous actor, oodles of wealth, well known. Okay, he's not a wallflower. You know, he can hold a room, he can talk away. So he provides her with fuel. He provides her with plenty of character traits, huge residual benefits. So very attractive. She doles out the, oh, Johnny, you're so marvelous. Dishes out some spicy poontang his way. She's a good looking woman. And, you know, there's also the aspect, of course, that she's much younger than he is. That appeals to his narcissistic trait of vanity. So she ensnares him. And then, as a consequence of her behaviors towards him and his own issues with his addiction and ADHD, he then starts to prove to be difficult to control. Heard as the type of narcissist that she doesn't back off, but instead there's heated ignition of fury where she tries to get him under control by physically assaulting him, by verbally assaulting him, by shitting in the bed. Yeah? Undoubtedly, probably flirting with other people in front of him, by conducting liaisons with other people, as has been alleged with Musk and Franco, etc. So she asserts control over him to do that rather than initially backing off because he's her possession. And at the end, of course, and this is why the relationship didn't last that long, was that because he keeps having to, because he keeps threatening her sense of control, she keeps having to try and assert control over him directly. And her narcissism takes her in that route time and time and time again because he's there in front of her. And it's only eventually that essentially disengagement occurs because her narcissism recognizes he's too hard to control. He's like it's like she's invaded a country and he's the insurgency.
Right,
So she disengaged by going for divorce because after that short period of time of them being together, I think what they were together roughly
8 months, or was it? It wasn't that long, was it?
Well,
11 months.
They met in 2011, and I think some shenanigans started towards them at the back end of the filming of the Rum Diary, and
Then
they were
right. I think 4 years or 5 years or whatever they
4 or
knew
5
each other.
years,
Weren't they only
something like that.
weren't they only married for a number of months?
Well, I think they got married in 2014, didn't they? And so I think it was only yeah. You might be right. Perhaps
I'm not sure.
a month or so, but
I know it was
either way,
short.
the relationship wasn't that long. The marriage certainly wasn't that long, and the reason for it was he gets the golden period. Everything's okay. I mean, he was absolutely smitten with her to begin with because she's giving him the golden period, and then his own behaviours and her devaluing of him as the fuel runs stale means that rather than him do the empathic route, which is what's wrong, what's the matter, how can we sort this out? Yes, he did that sometimes, but as a consequence of his addictions and his underlying strong narcissistic traits, he fought back with her, calling her names, shouting at her. I mean, it's alleged that he physically assaulted her. I don't believe that's the case, but it could have happened, which again is a threat to the narcissist's control. So she gave him this golden period. Everything's fine. And then, as a consequence of his narcissistic traits, he becomes more difficult to control. He enters devaluation. And he, rather than rolling over and being meek and a doormat, fights back. That offends her sense of control. She asserts control over him, more in a vitriolic fashion, abusing him. And that goes on through the sustained devaluation until such time as she then breaks off and disengages from him because that disengagement trigger, namely he's too difficult to control, is reached on the threshold and she backs off. Now, what about from Depp's perspective? Why is he drawn to her? Well, his narcissistic traits drive him forward, that he's vain. There's vanity there. Alongside his emotional empathy, there's pride. There's the showcasing. So he gets this beautiful younger woman that he can show the world, hey, look what I've got. Look what I've. So that all accords with that presentation there. He doesn't need to control her in a narcissistic sense. He doesn't have that pathological need. But he's drawn to her as a consequence of what she can still provide to him, which attunes with his narcissistic traits. And then, of course, he's drawn to her by the golden period, which a golden period can be given to normal empath or narcissistic. And everybody likes to have their tummy tickled. Okay, so he, as a narcissistic individual, has his tummy tickled by her, and he thinks, I'm getting great sex. I am, even at this age, I am a sexual god. Look at this vixen. She comes in and wanting a bit of little Johnny here. Fantastic. It's all good. And she's on my arm and she seems supportive and she takes my boots off and rubs my feet and all that kind of stuff. Because, of course, she's using cognitive empathy during this golden period. Then it goes wrong. And, of course, he doesn't immediately back off by saying, well, fuck this shit, I'm out of here. Why? Because his strong narcissistic traits of jealousy, of resentment, of defiance, of argumentativeness keep him in the game. A normal person has much weaker traits. They are much weaker. They would just walk away. They wouldn't get ensnared. They may not get ensnared in the first place. And if they did, they're more likely to walk away and go, because they haven't got that pride driving them to stay in. They haven't got the addiction like the empath to cause them to stay in. Instead, it's just like, this is too much like hard work, I'm bailing. But the narcissistic individual, his narcissistic traits are insisting, because he's so full of pride, hang on a second, I'm not letting this go down the crapper. I'm going to fight for this. I'm going to sort this out. And who does she think she is treating me this way? I'm going to tell her straight, you don't treat me this way. And it shows with his strong traits with regard to pride that we heard read out in court, of course, the email where he was slating her and Musk, where the language there was used particularly harsh and unsavory. And I'm dissecting that in a video which will be available, which is currently available, about why that happened and the reactions of them. So the dynamic between narcissist and narcissistic individual, the narcissist must have control as always. The narcissistic individual isn't glued into the relationship by addiction, but has the glue of strong narcissistic traits, which basically say, this person caters to our narcissistic traits, let's stick with them. And when it goes wrong, I resent the fact that I'm being treated this way. I'm going to conquer them. My pride's been dented by the way that I've been treated. I am going to win this. I'm not going to back down. I'm not going to shrink away. And thus, that's why a narcissistic individual will stay in a dynamic. Now, in some instances, of course, a narcissistic individual, if they've got other options, would jettison and go elsewhere. But with Depp, that wasn't the case. And a lot of narcissistic individuals, they'll stay and fight because their narcissistic traits drive them to do so. No addiction, no need for control. Their glue is their narcissistic traits.
Wow, that was that's why I wanted to talk to you about this and why I wanted to use these people as an example, just like you did in your series, because that was a fantastic explanation and cleared a lot of fog on some things that I couldn't understand about Johnny Depp in particular, because everybody loves him. And, you know, at first, HG, I thought he was a narcissist, just being around Hollywood, whatever. I thought he was kind of a shady guy. And then when I saw the trial, I was like, well, he's clearly exuding empathy. She's the narcissist. He went supernova on her ass. He's just trying to get the fuck out of here. But man, what you just laid out, that makes so much sense. Because there's a couple things I couldn't figure out. Like, he appears to have empathy, but he appears to be narcissistic, but he's such an angel. And there's something off about him. And he looks like he's acting as a character. When I first saw him acting, I was like, has this guy ever come out of character? There's something off about that dude. And you know, let's take up another element of that, because I know he's a really complex character to figure out. You covered the ADHD, you covered the backstory, you covered every little detail in that series. These issues of the ADHD. Well, let me ask you this. He obviously has very large drug and alcohol problems going back to early childhood. And he doesn't seem to have, and again, you went into fantastic detail on that. And he doesn't seem to have, seems to be a recurring pattern. And then also, well, what I'm asking you is, how would you know if somebody that was suffering a drug, let's say you had an empath, for example, that turned to drugs and alcohol to numb the pain, or they were suffering from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, or possibly ADHD? Would those three elements possibly create the somebody that seems like they're a narcissist, but if they extract themselves from those, or they heal, or they remove themselves from the external stressors? Like, because that's what happened to me, HG. I had a narcissistic family upbringing. I had a narcissistic cult environment that almost killed me. And I had a very limited, even though I had emotion, I had a very limited range. But as soon as I extracted myself from it, like you said, I completely changed. So how do you know for sure, unless you extract somebody from that, get somebody off the drugs or whatever, do you know for sure that what their real character might be underneath, or can you ascertain what that is irregardless of those
Well,
elements?
what one does is consider the fact that an empathic individual who has addiction issues, as you rightly point out, that's an external stressor, and that will erode their emotional empathy. So that person could engage in behaviors where they physically assault people who perhaps are preventing them getting through their drugs. They steal in order to pay for their habit. They turn into a horrible person because of the effect of the drugs. But because they're an empath, they have a bigger bank of emotional empathy there to begin with. So we don't see such a rapid descent. It takes longer to erode it. Also, they are more likely to try and tackle their addiction in a constructive fashion compared to a narcissistic individual, because their emotional empathy basically guides them as if it was a voice saying to them, you need to sort yourself out because your behavior is hurting other people. The narcissistic person doesn't have a stronger voice in that way because they've got that limited emotional empathy. So what we would see is that with an individual who is an empath that has addiction issues, sure, they can turn into a real shitty person, but they tend to be slower to get there. The behaviors aren't as marked because the underlying traits aren't as strong that are being exacerbated by the addiction. And there is a tendency for them to do more about it compared to a narcissistic individual. And as I made the point with Depp, he has had these problems for a long time and hasn't done anything really seriously to address them. His behavior when he is under the influence is particularly savage and nasty. Now, in some instances, that was exacerbated by Heard's behavior towards him, but in other instances, it wasn't. And that shows it's almost like pouring the addiction onto those narcissistic traits creates this conflagration of his behaviors, which is more marked. And it's that's where you can see the distinction, that it's the way that the addictive behaviors manifest in that individual. They're layered on top of something. And it's almost like, I suppose, if you were to look at somebody stood outside your window, if you're looking at them with clear glass, you can see them clearly. If you were to look at them through translucent glass, you see a bit of a blob. And if you were looking at them through smoke glass, you probably would only be able to see a silhouette. It all depends what you're viewing and through it. So layer the addiction onto an empathic individual, the behaviors as a whole are going to be different to those of where you layer the addiction on a narcissistic individual. And so that's how we see the distinction that's there. Yes, it certainly does cloud a person's character. Absolutely, it does. But there are moments where the clouds part and the sun shines through and you're able to see what's underneath there. And of course, as we saw with Depp, the crucial factors were his relationship with his children and the previous romantic relationships, as I explained in the conclusion.
That's such an the nuance that you have going on in this series, and also what you're explaining right now, is very, very fascinating to me. Because this guy was really hard to figure out, and I didn't get too pulled into the series, not the series. You kept me up at night with the frickin' series, but the trial itself, I just been checking it out in and out because I can't. It's I definitely can't listen to Amber. It's like I can take 5 minutes before I just start snoring or whatever. But HG, how about when it comes to, you mentioned earlier philanthropy too. So how would a narcissistic and a narcissist apply philanthropy? Because a lot of celebrities, of course, they have to do charitable work.
Indeed.
And yeah, how does that play out?
Okay, well, with the narcissist, it's there just purely for the prime aims. Okay, and having established that they are a narcissist, we know that then they're doing that philanthropy. Okay, that it's done purely for the prime aims. So if you were to look at three people, let's take three people, an empath, narcissistic individual and a narcissist, and they all engage in philanthropy. Excuse me. Looking at that, we won't be able to tell which one's which. They all engage in charitable works. They dress up as characters and go around children's hospitals, and they make healthy donations of their own cash. We can't make any distinction between them based just on their philanthropy alone. We have to look at everything else. And then, having looked at everything else and we determine what they are, then we apply that glass, as I was mentioning, in a way that we look through the lens and we say, right, this person's an empath. That means that when an empath engages in philanthropy, it's driven by their emotional empathy for other people. So they're doing it as a consequence of compassion, decency, caring, honesty, perhaps seeking a sense of justice in certain causes, a strong moral compass. How do we know that? Because we've established them as an empath. And because they've been established as that, when we then look at their behavior of philanthropy, we know that it must be predicated on those things. Let's take our narcissist. We now have established that he is a narcissist, or she is a narcissist who engages in philanthropy. What's driving it? Empathic traits? No, because there aren't any. Emotional empathy? No, because there isn't any. Cognitive empathy? Perhaps. They know how to behave. Facade management? Undoubtedly. Pursuit of fuel? Yes, everybody praises him for his charitable works. So he gets all of that fuel. It manages the facade. There may be some residual benefits because, as has been suggested of a certain narcissist married to a royal, there's a bit of a creaming off of the profits, in a sense, with the tax arrangements and so where the various foundations have been placed. So you have a residual benefit there, that you get some spondulics alongside the supposed good works. And so we know that with the narcissist, because that person is a narcissist, that when they engage in their philanthropy, it's self-serving. What about the narcissistic individual? Two worlds, in a sense, collide. They've got limited emotional empathy, so we know that they're doing it driven by some vestige of caring and compassion. But at the same time, it's self-serving for them as well, because it caters to those narcissistic traits of vanity and showcasing. And so basically, it's a case of the empath. Everybody likes to be praised. So when they say, thank you for your charitable works, some will go, oh, it's nothing. And others go, oh, you're very welcome. Thank you. I enjoy doing it. So it's nice to receive that praise, but they don't need the fuel. They do it driven by their emotional empathy and those traits. The narcissist does it absolutely to get all of that praise and admiration. The narcissistic individual does it because it caters to their narcissistic traits of showmanship, showcasing, and pride and vanity. So it makes them feel good about themselves for those reasons to a stronger extent than an empathic individual would. But they're also doing it because they do have some emotional empathy. So with Depp, when he dresses up as Captain Jack Sparrow, he does it because he is being caring towards those children to a limited extent, but also because it makes him feel good, because it's, look at me, I'm in character. So he gets both of those things coming together. An example of comparing these people would be, let's take, there are four houses, and there's a normal, an empath, there is a narcissistic individual, and there is a narcissist. And the empath is going away on holiday, enjoying 2 weeks in Aruba, and says to the normal, will you look after my cat Tiddles? The normal person has emotional empathy for all three of her neighbours. Yes, I'll look after Tiddles for you. Empath goes off to Aruba, comes back and has brought a gift, a bouquet of flowers. Why? Driven by their emotional empathy and their empathic trait of decency, they're saying thank you for looking after my cat. Okay? Driven by their emotional empathy. That's all they're doing. Their emotional empathy guides them to do the right and polite thing. Here's a reward for looking after my cat for 2 weeks. The mid-range narcissist decides that he's going to go and have 2 weeks getting around in New York City. And he says to the normal neighbor, will you look after my pet tarantula while I am away in New York City? And she goes, yes, if you tell me how I do it, I'll pop in and feed Spacey, your tarantula. And as a consequence, the narcissist goes away and comes back and also buys a bouquet of flowers. Why does the narcissist do that? Well, mid-range narcissist thinks they're a kind and empathic person, but they're not, because they're a narcissist. Their narcissism drives them to bribe the empath with a gift, to assert control over them, and to draw fuel from them. Oh, thank you for the lovely flowers. They show they're under control. They have to be brought under control because they've come up on the radar, and they give fuel. What about our narcissistic person? Well, they want 2 weeks away. they are going surfing in Newquay in the United Kingdom, and say, will you look after my boa constrictor for 2 weeks, please? Yes, will do. Goes in, regularly feeds the mice to it or whatever. And 2 weeks later, back comes our narcissistic individual with a bouquet of flowers. Now, why has the narcissistic individual done that? Well, they do have some limited emotional empathy. So it's driven partially by doing the right thing. But also, our narcissistic individual knows that in 3 weeks' time, he's going away again. And he knows that if he keeps her on side with a big bouquet of flowers, she will look after the boa constrictor again. So there is both emotional empathy for her and self-serving interest. So the narcissistic individual is almost like a meeting of worlds.
Did we cover the normal HG, how they would respond?
The normal's the neighbor. They don't get to go on holiday because everybody's dumping their animals on them.
All right, or
perhaps the normal eventually thinks there's been an erosion of my emotional empathy for all three of these, and throws the cat in with the tarantula and the snake and all that.
Now, that's your psychopathic traits coming out. Well, you can't can you?
Yes, indeed. That's always the thing. Actually, you're right to point that out. It's frequently. The psychopathic element of me is left thinking, I wonder what will happen if I do this.
I know you're who you say you are, HG. There's no doubt about it. But you are, at least over the internet and what you provide, the nicest narcissist I've ever had the pleasure to speak with, man. It's kind of a bizarre combination, what you do. And then
it's entirely understandable because I know the value of maintaining this facade of being approachable and pleasant.
I bet you do.
Because the evolution of my narcissism is such that if I was to start off the interview by being rude to you, listeners would think, well, he's a bit of an arsehole, and you wouldn't want to speak to me again, and that would adversely affect my legacy. And because of my higher executive function and my ability to control ignited fury to a very high degree, that enables me to, and I make it very clear when I talk to people that I don't suspend my narcissism.
Right, you do make that clear. And you do have a really excellent facade, because I know that you're using that, and it's the charm and everything to so that you're not off-putting, and so that people will melt into your ways, right?
Exactly. Because I have learned that's the most appropriate way to deal with people, by the exhibition of charm. What I also don't do is I don't mislead people by going, oh, yes, everything's going to be all right. Uncle H.
Why don't you do that? Wouldn't a narcissist? That's what I'm trying to wrestle with. Why I know the honesty, quote unquote, comes from the desire to be right about the work, to know that you've laid down some awesome shit and that it's accurate. So I get that, but why that other aspect then? Why not be more of a dick? I mean, is this the advanced narcissism? Is this what a greater or aware narcissist can do? HG is
exactly
that fury really
being a dick. Being a dick gets in the way of what I want to achieve.
I see.
So there are instances where I will do something which will be unpleasant to somebody, and it's entirely merited, but I do it in such a way as that either other people don't know about it, so it's not going to affect the facade, or if other people do know about it, they will be inclined to agree with me that I was justified in doing what I do, because I have created an image of that individual. I'll have undermined them repeatedly, so that when some form of righteous retribution is dealt out against them, other people will go, well, you got what was coming to you. So I'll give you an example. For instance, there are certain narcissists that come and throw themselves at me, and I will play with them, toy with them. I won't do this to my honest clients, because that's adverse to the legacy. But with the ones that are narcissists, I'll toy with them, and then I'll ignore them, and then they'll go off to a little corner of cyberspace and complain about HG Tudor being a really horrible person. And what response do they get? He's a narcissistic psychopath. What do you expect?
Wow. I can think of one person, by the way, that you're irritating, HG, because you know who I'm talking about. Well, I'm not even going to give him any energy. I love the fact that you don't even, I love the fact that you don't even,
no.
I love the fact that you're so busy, you can't even freaking focus on these idiots. Hey, let me ask you this, if you don't mind. You know, one of the things I was thinking of with getting back to Johnny Depp real quick is that The company that he keeps, he's hung around some pretty questionable people. Hunter S. Thompson, Marilyn Manson, there's some interesting circumstances surrounding River Phoenix's death outside the Viper Room, various people around Johnny Depp disappearing. You got Damien Eccles and off, in the West Memphis.
Well, yes, indeed.
It's just this kind of, what does the company that a person keeps say about them? Are there any clues in ascertaining who somebody is with that element?
Well, I think that you can, to some extent, utilize that in your overall assessment, but you wouldn't rely on it in isolation. So with Depp, with these questionable characters, that's redolent of reduced emotional empathy in terms of how it might affect other people. And it caters, of course, to his grandiosity that arises out of his vanity and his pride, that I'm the type of guy that should be hanging out with these really interesting people. And there is that arrogance there that I don't give a fig if people think that me hanging out with Marilyn Manson's a bad thing. And I know that the situation with Eccles is very divisive, because I've had my clients and readers and viewers contacting me saying there's something not right there, but they've witnessed that if you were to criticize him, that there's a lot of people that suddenly jump to his defense and start threatening people. So the people that he involves himself with, again, are demonstrative of the narcissistic individual that he is.
Right.
And because his facade, remember, vacillates in a sense of, yes, he doesn't portray himself as the uber caring individual, but rather it's a facade of flawed, decent individual that's a maverick and a bit kind of not really part of all of this, in a way. I'm separate and better from you, but without being too haughty and arrogant about it. So it's I will come, and so you see turning up as Captain Jack Sparrow, well, the kids all love it, so that's a demonstrative and element of limited emotional empathy. But he doesn't turn up as Johnny Depp and sit there and talk to them. He has to turn up as the flamboyant Captain Jack Sparrow. That's his narcissistic traits. Now, some people will say, well, the kids will want Jack Sparrow rather than Johnny Depp, and that's probably right. But that still doesn't remove the fact that it's his narcissistic traits driving him to turn up in character rather than as Johnny Depp. I suspect if you ask Johnny Depp, who is Johnny Depp, he wouldn't be able to answer you.
He said exactly that. He said that in one of the interviews, he doesn't want to know kind of who he is. It was something, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something, he won't watch his own movies and stuff like that. It's just a very, very interesting guy.
He is. He's very talented.
There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
People, HG, some of the people think that the characters that he plays, and I got lost in that world too. When you're trying to do a character well, you have to kind of have no boundaries and let yourself go. People think that they know Johnny Depp based on his characters. Well, he was so sweet in this movie. Dude, that's not who somebody is. The characters, like a good actor can actually seem very authentic on camera, and they don't necessarily have to be an authentic person. Believe me, dude, I know that to be a fact, just from the people that I've hung out with. People would be surprised at who they're.
Well, this goes back to this phenomenon of the parasocial relationship, where somebody sees somebody on screen, or it can be a pop star or a sports star, and based upon what they see in their professional guys, they think they know them. And this is the old adage of never meet your heroes, because you see this person who turns up on a football pitch, scores 3 goals, signs the autographs, and then gives an interview and talks about his love for the club and kisses the badge, and you think, oh, he's a great guy. If you were to meet him, you'd find him foul-mouthed, more interested in banging hookers and not bothering with the kids, because that's a persona that you're being shown. And people think that they have a kind of relationship with them because... They do. And particularly social media has enhanced that, because you see so much about this person's lives. Years ago, it was almost as if famous actors and actresses and pop stars and the like went into a shoebox, and they just came out to do the shows, and you never really knew much else about what else they did.
Right.
But now, because of social media, if they're so minded, and we see this particularly with the narcissistic and narcissists, everything from using the toilet to having a miscarriage, to having sex to showing you the inside of their home is plastered all over social media. There is no magic or mystery anymore and that causes the people that worship these individuals or are fans of them to really feel like they know them. I've been there at their worst moments. I've been there when Chrissy Teigen suffered a miscarriage because she plastered it on Instagram. Lack of boundary recognition, sense of entitlement, absence of emotional empathy from her. I've analysed her in the Tudorscope, as you know. And somebody who's a fan of hers thinks, oh, I know her because she shared her intimate moments. She doesn't. She could easily breeze past you and not piss on you if you were on fire.
It's so bizarre, HG. I'm sorry.
No, please carry on.
You cut out. I didn't want to interrupt you. Were you speaking?
No, I paused and then you made your observation. So
my bad. I just got yeah, believe me, I know what you're talking about, man. And in that social media, it's taken away the mystery. I don't want to know who all these people are. I don't want to know who's. I don't want to know. I miss that, man.
Yeah, it's taken away the mystery, and it's also made famous people seem accessible when actually they're not.
Right. Good point.
In the mind of people, this concept of the parasocial relationship, where they think to themselves, yeah, I really do know this person. So that creates a bond with them, so that they form a view based upon what they're being shown. Well, who does that the most? Who shows you what they want you to see? My kind do. My kind.
Right.
And so it's all about managing all of that and showing you all of these things. Now, certain narcissists are haphazard and they put everything out there, good and bad. But a lot, it's all about showing you how beautiful their home is and all the beautiful outfits that they're wearing. And here's me at this gala and here's me at this ball. And they don't show you the fact that, you know, they have to spend 3 hours getting rid of the hump on their back and getting rid of the particularly hirsute, and, you know, putting in the chicken fillets and changing it all these differences that have to be made. And people fall for it. And they are shown a particular facet of that individual's life, and they think that is wholly who they are.
Yep.
And it cons people.
Social media has created this whole illusion, this sub-reality that's not real, but it's pretty damn convincing. And like you said, you feel like you know these people. I want to go back to the mystery where we didn't know these freaking people. Yeah. Well, of course, HG, we have 8 minutes left. That went by so freaking fast.
Well, I guess if what you want to touch on, Doug, we can carry on a bit longer. That's fine.
Okay. I have a whole separate interview, which I'll save for later if you're kind enough to come back.
No problem with that. So you can save that for another time then.
Well, I wanted to leave people with a bit of a cliffhanger.
Let's do that.
I always have so much to ask you. I need to book. I'll pay you, man. I need to book a 5-hour interview with you because it's right when we get going. We have to end off. But anyway, so let's end off with this, HG. And we touched upon this in one of the other episodes. And I know you have an empath series that you're working on.
That's right.
So don't give away anything you don't want to. But we've covered in great detail, you on your videos and us in these interviews, on how a narcissist is formed, namely the lack of a controlled environment and the genetic predisposition. And we touched upon very briefly how an empath was formed. Could you possibly say a little bit about that in closing? And like I said, anything you might want to say on the upcoming empath series. And then I guess we'll delve more into that area, because that leads into the whole other interview that I had planned before you put out this masterpiece on, the whole trial.
There's two things I'll say to that, Doug. The first is I am going to tease now, and basically the creation of the empath is what's covered in this new material that's going to come forward.
Oh, excellent.
So I'm going to keep that under wraps for now, because it's going to be addressed in detail. So suffice to say, it helps people understand what makes a super empath. How's a codependent formed? Why does the standard empath become that way? What makes a contagion? So it is addressed. Now, I've done a lot of work on that and a considerable body of research to get to that. So I'm going to keep that one under wraps for now.
Sure.
But I'm also going to mention, because I know many of our viewers, particularly interested in this following the interview that you kindly did with me for the 100K, that You did your empath detector just recently.
I wanted to cover that, but like I said, we got to cover this interview.
So I
This
think that
interview
we put
first.
that as item 1 on the agenda for our next conversation.
I
'Cause
have it
know,
right here. I was going to
there it
bring it
is.
up. I got
There
my.
it is. So people, because I know people are asking about what's the outcome for Doug, and of course I can't tell them because it's confidential. But
I'll tell them.
You can say whatever you'd like to say about it to discuss it. So let's discuss that, and then that'll segue nicely into the other material about empaths on the next occasion. So when we conclude this, we'll get something in the diary.
Sure. Did you want me to bust that out right now, or did you want to save that for the next interview?
I think it would be worth saving.
Oh, that's a super teaser. I see the way you work. You weren't only leading me on in the series. Now you want to lead me on in the interviews. I see how you work, HG.
Exactly. Keep them wanting more.
That's great. Okay, that's a perfect place to end it. I absolutely love this conversation, man. Thank you once again. And as usual, HG, if you don't mind, I would do this for you, but you can explain your own work a lot better. I don't want to fuck it up. So could you please tell people what you offer and where they can avail themselves of your services?
Okay. Well, thanks again, Doug, for an excellent conversation. Always find these productive. And there's a good rapport between you and I look forward to the next one, which we've already foreshadowed.
Thank you.
In terms of people accessing my work, you can go to narcsite.com, which is narcsite.com, which is a blog where there are thousands of articles that you can read all about narcissism and psychopathy and empaths. And there is a very good community of commenters there who are very supportive of one another. It's quite a tight and cozy group, I think is a good way of describing it. But they are not a clique. They are welcoming to other people.
They're not a cult, despite what that asshole says.
They're not a cult. Apparently, I run a cult. Did you know that, Doug? Did you know you're getting sucked back into my cult here?
Yeah, Scientology wasn't good enough, so I'm like, fuck it. I'm gonna go into the guy to help save me from that shit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you ought to. And if you wear some shit around your neck, that really demonstrates your empathic credentials.
Well, if you're going to go full cult, my man, you got to get, uniforms, and you got to get a sleep deprived. There's a whole bunch of stuff I can teach you, if you really want to go the cult route.
If you send me an invoice for your cult services, and then that'll help me implement that better and brainwash everybody.
No problem. HG, Great. If I didn't have a conscience, I'd be a millionaire because I know exactly how to manipulate people, and I could easily start my own cult. But since you don't have a conscience, I'll gladly pass information over to you. Dude, you already obviously know this far better than I do.
Indeed. So that's the blog. I also have a YouTube channel, which is HG Tudor, Knowing the Narcissist, the Ultra. Just search for that, and there's about 2,700 videos there telling you lots and lots about me and narcissism and practical tips, etc. If you want to know, are you dealing with a narcissist, go to the blog, and if you go in the menu bar, there is the narc detector. If you want to know if you're an empath, as we touched on, as I just discussed with Doug, you can do that. You can learn what your traits are, and you can ascertain whether you're weaponized. And if you want to speak to me so that you can embrace my vast repository of knowledge and information, as thousands of other people have done to seize the power and escape their narcissism and live happily ever after, you can book an audio consultation with me, and I'll listen to what you're dealing with and provide you with all of the answers. So there's a huge wealth of material that's free, and then there are paid services such as those, and there's also the Knowledge Vault, again in the menu bar at narcsite.com, with over 200 products and services which will enable you to understand more about yourself and narcissists. So that's the blatant merching done. Back to you, Doug.
Thank you very much. And also for those services that he just listed on my channel in the description box, I'm going to link everything he just said. And also, as I mentioned, part 1 of the series that you can go check out. And also we talked about a couple other videos that he mentioned. I'll make sure that I include those in the description box too, so you don't have to go searching for everything that HG just said. I really, really love talking to you, man. And I appreciate your time. I know you're a very, very busy person. And thank you very much. Until we speak again, my friend.
Always got time for you, Doug. Always.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. You're too nice. Take care, my friend.
You too.